Welcome to the podcast series on living a revenue culture. Revenue culture is that place where maximizing profits comes together as a result of optimizing a people-first culture. And our guest today is Troy Rice. Troy and I have been friends for 20 years. And we met in a Vistage group about 20 years ago. And we still hang out in originally it was a tech group. Now it's a Vistage group 20 years later. And Troy's career has been really fascinating. He starts out as a public accountant with Deloitte and then moves through about every meaningful position in a corporation, biz dev, COO, CIO, investor, founder, then executive coach, chair with Vistage, and now recently Tiger 21. But as an observer of Troy's career, his success is based on his people skills and his focus on and commitment to people while the organization needs to be profitable and grow. So with that, welcome, Troy.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's great to be chatting with you today. And I listened to you talk about my accolades, and I think which I always appreciate you saying. And yet, as I was just sharing with you a few minutes ago, I think I've learned more in the last 2 years than I've cumulatively learned in all the previous years. And so I look forward to seeing what I will become as opposed to where I've been.
Well, and that's such a great way to kick this off, because that's the whole purpose of this podcast is, where we've been in the past, at least in my opinion, didn't do enough for the people part. And, I think that's one of the things that the pandemic alerted was there are things more important than a single focus, short-term focus on money. And so, Simon Sinek's infinite game to me woke me up to, I get to decide every day, am I in an infinite game or in a finite game? And in the infinite game, people are the key. So first, kick us off and share with us two things. In your career, what were some of the really points where you just got an aha and a takeaway that helped you get to the next level? And as part of that, I know from working with you, purpose makes a difference. So if you'd share your purpose and some of the key learnings that got you where you are today.
Yeah, so I think back and recently the University of Iowa, which was my undergrad, has asked me to come back and teach class. And I said, honestly, there is no topic today or no current class that one, I'd probably be qualified to teach, but two, that I would want to teach. But I said if I was to do it, there was two topics that I'd want to teach. And the first of which came out of my experience at the University of Iowa and really continued on throughout my career, but yet I didn't realize it until now later in my career. And it's about building powerful networks. And when I say building powerful networks, it's not about you. It's about creating those long and lasting relationships that are built on mutual respect and appreciation and value that is created for one another, where you're invested in each other over a very long period of time. So like Rick, like you, we've spent 20 years together, and I've got probably 50 or 60 relationships that span from my early days at Deloitte, and I leverage those in such great ways. But we mutually value each other, we mutually appreciate each other, and we've come to respect what each other can do and the value that we add in the marketplace. So that's probably one. Two, and this was probably the harder lesson, because I was pretty driven. I was socially immature, but very mature at an early age from a business standpoint. But I was very driven. It was about me. It was about me accomplishing. It was about everything started with the word me. And what I learned, what I think people tried to teach me, I just didn't recognize it early enough. And if I had it all do over again, that's probably the one thing I would change, is that I would more quickly get to the point that it is not about me. and I just find that in business, if we got there quicker, we could accomplish so much more. I got in the way of fulfilling my purpose, and I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be all about fulfilling my purpose, but I cannot do that if it's about me. It has to be a serve first mentality. It has to be about how do I add value to others. And hey, if that happens, I'll be able to extract value for myself. I'll always be taken care of. But those are probably the two big things I've learned, Rick. I'm sure there's lots of others, but they're the two things when you mention it that I first think about.
It's interesting, the combination of adding value to others and the focus not being on me. One of the hardest things I do in my work is to get people to do things from a buyer's frame of reference. And people think about, well, I understand my buyer, and what they mean by that is I know how to manipulate them, or I know how to tweak them, or extract wallet share from them, or upsell them. And I think we educated, certainly my generation, completely in that way of thinking. And so it's hard now to start breaking those old myths. And it's not about upsell, cross-sell, wallet share, dominating the market. It's a completely different thing.
Absolutely. You talked about purpose, and I think my purpose, which you asked about, is kind of guided me. That's when I became a Vistage chair, was the first time I'd been asked about purpose and my personal vision and mission. And those are things that vision, mission, values, they were always part of my organizational activities, but I don't want to be crass, but ultimately they were almost like things to put up on placards on the wall that you could check the box that said you had them. And that was a mistake on my part. I now realized how valuable they are, because they're the anchor for the culture.
Yes.
And that culture becomes everything. But mine, and what I really pour myself into every day, is I deeply want and desire to help executives move from success to significance. I've been so blessed in my life to be around people that were incredibly successful. And even when I was successful, I ultimately came to the end of myself when I realized that success was like a drug. It was never going to fulfill me. It was just going to continue to leave a blank there that I had to go get more and more and more of it. And it was because it was still about me. And when it started becoming about impact, about legacy, about investing in others, that's when things really started to blossom for me. And when I started with Vistage, that became my why, that became my purpose, and it drives everything I do today. And it's the filter by which I decide whether I'm going to do something.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you say that, I've just read a number of books lately, and they opened my eyes to a bigger social purpose to business in general. And the fact that when I think of culture today, I think that the buyer, the customer, is part of the culture, and the community is part of the culture. And that, that's the definition that seems sustainable and really worth pursuing. Have you got observations on that?
So I'll let me give my plug, first of all, to the important work that you do. I so often reference back to things that you've been pouring into me over the last 20 years on revenue science and buyer back, and it just is a constant reflection of the important things. And when you say from a buyer's perspective, I think I misunderstood, or used to misunderstand that, where it was looking for the crack in their armor, and then using the crack to try to convince them or compel them to want to buy whatever it was I was selling. And we're all buying and selling something, whether it's directly or indirectly, as opposed to what I now do, which is what you really meant all along by from a buyer's perspective, is really meeting the buyer where they're at, understanding and digging to understand what was important to them, what are the problems they're trying to solve, and then fully understanding the problem I can solve. And when there is a meeting of those two, great things happen. Whenever there's not a meeting of those two, we're better to walk away or try to help them in another way, because we're going to be fitting square pegs in round holes. It's never going to work out long term. And if you play the infinite game, you have to, you can't put square pegs in round holes.
Yeah. And it gets so exciting when you really are mentally at one with the buyer, because once you understand what their opportunities or struggles or passions are, then we can apply our passions and our thought leadership and the things we know that will make their world better. And both of us all of a sudden get better. And from that infinite standpoint, we don't ever want to get rid of each other.
And you never know where it's going to take you. So by admitting today that it's a square peg in a round hole from a buyer's perspective, it yields the opportunity to have future discussions when it might. Right. And so, yeah, I can't tell you how many times that's come back now, where people appreciate. I just had a conversation the other day where I was asking some questions, and they said, I don't know that this is a good fit. I said, I don't know that it is either. I just said, hey, but let's learn a little bit about each other, and we'll mutually discover that. And if not, hey, I'll help you in any way I can. Whether that's a benefit to me or not, it always benefits me if I can benefit you first.
I want to go back to your purpose statement earlier. One of the things that has become obvious to me, and it's very similar to being from that buyer's frame of reference, is when I think about culture, and for a long time, we were all trying to get the right people on the bus. And often right people on the bus was interpreted as resume or credential or experience. To me, right people on the bus starts with purpose. Mm. If all the people on the bus share a common purpose, then all of a sudden, that's an exciting bus ride. And, we can leverage their individual creativity and growth, because as fast as the technology around us is changing, whatever we know today will be less valuable in a year. And so if we're all committed to the same purpose, that just gets exciting to me. Hmm. Are you experiencing that today? Are you seeing that change in definition?
I am. I'm also seeing the change in definition because people are starting to value their culture more, and some of it got lost in COVID. When people were remote, their cultures were too dependent upon the raw being together, and nothing wrong with that. That's very powerful. And people built deep relationships with one another. And when they weren't there, they found out their culture had some weaknesses, but it was really because there was not this anchoring purpose for why we've band together to begin with. It was built around less substantial things. And in often cases, there really was a purpose. It just wasn't what was focused on. And so now they've gone back and they're doing the heavy lifting. But what they've also found is they didn't use that guiding principle, that North Star, in their hiring. And so it just exposed weaknesses. I was really working with an organization literally yesterday, and it was they didn't like some of the things I had to say, because as it related to culture, I basically said, we have what we deserve.
Yeah.
We hire them, we train them, we give them, we share our purpose, and we attract those who, if we allow it, we attract those that are bound by our purpose. But then we have to bring them in and we have to model that and exemplify that. And when you don't have what you want, the only place you can look is yourself.
You and I both have worked in tech Vistage organizations for decades now. And one of the things I always admire is most, I would guess, no research, but I'd guess 90% of Vistage companies started because they had a purpose. And it could be they're passionate engineers, or they're passionate about helping or wellness, or there's an infinite number of exciting purposes that started their business. But then someplace along the line, they get scale becomes the purpose, or some number of zeros becomes the purpose, and they lose what was the original energy. And so now when I try and encourage them, push them, challenge them to go back to the purpose, it's really amazing how hard it is to go back to what originally started them. It almost feels on the square peg, round hole kind of thing. It feels very uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's not that it cannot be done, but it's far easier if you can do it out of the gate, and you can continue it and continue to invest in it. And because it doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah. I'm working with a client now that, it's interesting as you say that. They're a, almost 50-year-old company. And it's interesting, the employees seem to be closer to the original purpose than the C-suite, who's getting pushed by private equity or stock market or something else. And, it's interesting to watch the disconnect between the people in the culture and the people in the leadership seats, because they're really the square peg, round hole, different purpose kind of thing.
It is amazing. It's easy for us to lose our way, and whether it's our customers that guide us back or our employees that guide us back, it's good when somebody guides us back. Because shiny objects like PE and big numbers and scale and all these other things, that there's nothing wrong with them, but it doesn't do us any good if we lose ourselves in that process.
Well, and one of the things, we talked about the infinite game that is interesting today. When I listen to conversations, and one set of conversations is talking pure numbers, and the thing they don't really talk about is time frame. I mean, the time frame is this quarter or this, but they don't ask the question, what's the impact in 2 years or 3 years or 18 months or some longer period of time when culture impacts occur, when customers get angry. They just look at this short-term culture or short-term number, and they apply that to their culture and their customer relations. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I say the short term's good, so I live for the short term and I forget the future.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that, Rick, because the whole investing in people, we seem to be at an inflection point, in my opinion, where people are, there's not enough people to do the work. And there's a lot of movement in the marketplace because of that supply and demand inequity. And last month I was talking with some folks, a bunch of folks, and they were talking about development and developing their people. And at least 4 or 5 of them go, we just can't make those investments because there's so many people that are leaving. And I said, so you're concerned about investing in people in case they leave. So what happens if they stay? So you want uneducated, undeveloped people to stay in your organization? We make investments all the time that don't pan out. So you focus on the ones that you keep, not the ones that go. And if great, you invested in somebody and they go on and do other great things, that's part of the equation. Your job is to create the culture and the environment that people want to stay in. And part of that is that they're learning and growing.
Well, and Troy, I love that. And, when you were talking about some of your learnings earlier and, the importance of keeping track of, people who you trust and, like to work with as an employer, if I train up great people and they leave me, they become my business partners, they become my customers, they become my referral sources. There's all these things that, and that's why I personally believe today culture includes all of that.
It does. It does. I mean, you and I both have so many examples. I mean, I have partners and friends and people that work with me and for me that we've been together for, gosh, I'm scared to say this, but 30 plus years. I mean, and man, they're my go-to people because I know what they're capable of. I know who they're about and what their purposes are and how they align with mine. And you don't get that overnight, but you have to make those investments over time to get there.
Well, and it's interesting. One of the investments that for a lot of people is difficult. I know it's one you're very good at today, and that is being vulnerable so that people really know who you are. Because we know statistically trust is huge, but I'm not sure we're all really good at either giving it or getting it, and being willing to open up and let people in that way.
Yeah, the whole trust and it really starts with vulnerability, the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to be transparent. And, those that play their cards close to their vest, they're just at a disadvantage. You may get burnt. Okay, that's part of the equation. It's risk reward, but the return far outweighs the risk of opening up, of putting your cards on the table, because that's the only way you find if there's that meeting of the minds, that joining of purpose.
Yeah, and it's you've got your Vistage background there, and of all the things that come from being engaged with Vistage, it's that carefrontation, that clarifying questions, that's focusing on the issue, not the people, that it teaches leaders to do. And then hopefully leaders, cascade that down through their organizations. But that's one of the hard ones today because there aren't many places we learn those.
You're absolutely right, Rick, that really seeking first to understand before you're understood. I don't know whether it's a lost art or it's an art that never existed, but it's in the successful companies and the successful executives, what we now call EQI. Emotional intelligence, that's what it's all about. It's asking, it's understanding, it's meeting people where they are. Empathy.
Yeah. I think, I grew up in the auto industry, and I think having grown up in the auto industry, we wouldn't have said this. My first grown-up job was Pontiac Motors in 1966. And they would have never said these words, but today I look back and they treated the people as stand-ins until the robots got there. Yeah. And, in that, if that's your mindset, empathy is just not one of the things you're focused on.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Rick. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say that in my early career, I felt like I was an interchangeable part, and I treated everybody else as interchangeable parts too. If this one didn't work, there was always the next one.
Yep. So let's change the subject a little. It's not the subject, but the direction a little bit. Because I know this is an area that you focus on and you have a lot of experience. People don't often think about their business model. And to me, business model includes the customer journey and the culture. They don't typically think about that as a value add, and you talked about personally doing value add. I mean, that's your personal business model transferring value. when you think of organizations, what could they be thinking about or doing so that they could combine, this human element with business process to transfer value to the buyer? And as you said earlier, which I love, we try and get people to think about all the time, if I really transfer value, people are going to pay me in accordance with the value I transfer. So it's not this, I'm just being a missionary and giving everything away. I'm transferring value to make their world better, and they're happy to transfer value back. But to me, that's a business model issue. And too often, all we think about is the product. And I think that's, we miss both transferring and receiving value.
So two things come to mind, and actually both of them come from you. So I get the pleasure of repeating back to you some of the lessons I've learned that are what I coach people on all the time. People have this tendency, companies have this tendency to either misunderstand or have never understood the problems they solve. What is the problem that you exist to solve? It's your purpose. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, and to a little bit more granular level, because the more you understand the problem that you solve or the problems that you solve, well, the better able you are to match that up when you then go out to understand the problems that people have. And part and parcel of that is understanding the value of the problems that you solve. You can't charge more than the value of the problem you're solving, or if you do, it's going to be very short-lived. And yet people are out there all the time trying to convince people that their product is worth the price that they want to charge, and they haven't understood what is the problem that your product solves, and what's the value of that problem.
Yeah. And it's interesting, as I was listening to you, the lights went off, and we talk about the bell curve and the different kinds of buyers. The buyers can be in the same industry. They can have the same job titles, but in one case, the human is just interested in a commodity, quick, low-cost fix, because at where they are in their world right now, that's all they need. But often we don't ever really learn who that person is and understand what's important in their world. And so we think they're like the other person we just left, who has a really interesting, high-value problem that we can solve and make a lot of money for. And somehow we think those two things are the same. And then we manage our sales force and our marketing team. Well, we got this one, go get that one at the same price. They're the same. And that business model, it hurts.
It does. It does. And again, at the left side of the bell curve, in that more innovative, non-commodity space where we understand the problem we're trying to solve, and the client sort of understands the problem it's trying to solve, but there's a lot more risk and reward that takes place in that side of the curve. And so people, they're figuring out, they're willing to experiment a little bit. They don't know for sure you can solve their problem. You don't know for sure, but you know enough about each other and your purposes that you think there is a good probability that you can do that. On the other end of the spectrum, we get caught up in this commodity game, but even in the commodity game, you have to understand the value of the problem you're solving. And it's not just the price of your product. A good friend of mine just sold a huge lumber operation, and they were never the cheapest. But if you had to have the product at your site on time, they were the only game in town. And so that combination made them the dominant player. Now, if somebody that wasn't the problem they were trying to solve, they were just trying to get the cheapest price, well, then they weren't the answer to that problem.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, just in this conversation, it's clear that we talk about joint statement of work, which is really that that coming together of the humans to understand what the buyer is really trying to accomplish, and the seller helping to understand what the buyer might accomplish if they knew what the thought leadership in the seller's head was, they could get so much more. Which is, if I go to buy lumber and I don't realize somebody can actually deliver it on my site the day I need it, so I don't have a crew standing around doing nothing. If I don't know that, I can't ever make that relationship. And so it's that, and it comes back to the Vistage, understanding, asking questions, putting myself in the other person's shoes, not because I want to force them into more wallet share for me, but it's because I can help them solve a problem that if I can understand the problem clearly, I can take it away.
Exactly. Yeah, is so many things. It's like the difference between a demo and a preview. I use that Rickism oftentimes as well. So when we're demoing things, we're trying to show them what we can do, as opposed to showing them how we can solve their problem, how we believe we can solve their problem, because we've listened to them and we've now come back to them with their solution, or at least what we believe is the solution to their problem, or at least a solution to their problem. They may be one and the same, meaning it's not like, but we start with listening to them and then understanding how our solution can solve their problem, and we come back to them to preview that.
Amen.
And then people also go, well, when we're early days, well, okay, but don't demo it. Just seek market feedback on what you're bringing to market to see whether it solves the problem you're trying to solve. That's okay too, but they're different things in different parts of the customer's journey. So, and you get all this because you're the one that told me these things. So,
well, one of the things that is so interesting is if you and I preview what your world can be like if we work together, we can continuously improve that preview. Because as you share more and I bring you additional IP or additional best practices we can continually improve on that preview. It's hard to continuously improve on a demo because it's not about the buyer.
Exactly.
So a couple more things I'd love to get your feedback on this morning. One is, what's your biggest takeaway from the pandemic that helps us be better in the future? And when I say us, this is that culture that includes the buyer and the seller and the community and the employees. And what's the pandemic shown us that we really need to pay attention to?
Probably, and this has a lot of tentacles to it, but the first thing I would say is humans first. It really taught me, I think it taught every organization that if we do not focus on the humans first, whether those be customers, whether they be our team, whether they be our investors, if we don't focus on them first, there is no second. And so it's that simple. And we have to meet everybody where they are, and which doesn't sound very efficient, but we're made up of human beings, and they're messy and they're complicated, and their one size doesn't fit all. But what we can have are some guiding pillars, like we just talked about, like purpose, like here is what we are about, and here's how we do things. And if you share some of this, come. We want to invite you in, and we're going to interview for it. We're going to reward based on it. We're going to invest in you because of it. All of those things. So that's probably first and foremost. And we articulate that to the client, and we value our clients, and we invest in our clients, and and we reward our investors, and we want to understand them, and we want to understand what's going on in their life, because it's not always a direct line. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and it's partial, that's just another tentacle. I've been ringing the bell since 2013, when I got into the branch of economics that are related to demographics. And what became clear to me is that there was going to be a supply and demand inequity in terms of people to do the work. And not only that, but the skill sets to do the work.
Yep.
And if we didn't figure that out, we're going to be in real trouble. And we are.
Yep.
And now, when people go back to work, post-COVID, and, some of the support programs, it'll help, but it's still not going to solve the problem. We're in a scarce resource environment, in that there is more purposeful work to do than there are people to do it. And even the people to do it don't always have the skill sets to do it. And worse yet, from our vantage point, we have not given them the guidance on what it means to be part of our organizations. Therefore, they cannot be attracted to the purpose. We have to do better, and we have to train better, and we have to attract better. It's I don't work with anybody that goes, I have all the people I need.
Yeah, and you are so spot on that it's not that the future is not going to make this problem any less. The future is going to make this problem bigger. And so it's interesting as you talk about, sometimes people say, well, it costs more. Well, maybe if your time frame is 90 days, or even if your time frame's a year, but if your time frame's anything beyond a year, the investment you make today is going to pay big dividends over time. And, that's why, we think if you're in a mercenary business and you're willing to just close the doors in 6 months, then okay, do that short-term thing. But if you're really going to be here next year or the year after, or for 10 years, you really got to change the way we're looking at things.
Oh, literally, just side note on that, was in a Vistage meeting a couple months ago, and we just went around the table. This is just 14 CEOs, and we said, if you could hire everybody that you needed, how many positions would you hire? Just around that table of 14 CEOs, there was almost 1,000 open positions.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Now, can they get along without all of them? Yeah, they can get along, but they're not meeting their market demand because they do not have the people to do the work.
Well, and you certainly started your career as an accountant, and my undergraduate was cost accounting. If we just look at the short term, the answer is yes, we can do the work. But if you look at what your strategy was and what your opportunity was, your top line, you may be giving up hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that the market would be happy to consume if you were able to fulfill.
And the reality is, if somebody in that gap, if somebody figures out how to fill that need, now you've introduced competitors that others have come to rely on because they need to.
Well, and even history says even worse for the original company, good for the competitor. If the competitor also can't hire people, they figure out how to do it with technology, and they completely change the business environment, and they're solving it a new way that the original member sitting at your table is not using.
Exactly right.
So, okay, last question for you. I mean, we could do this. We have to do this for years. But the last one is, what's your takeaway for people to think about when it comes to the ability to maximize your profit, really requiring optimizing your people first culture, And is that a thing? Or if it is a thing, what should they think about? Or just what's your advice in that space?
One, have a adequate planning horizon, because to optimize in 1 year isn't the same as optimizing over a long haul. And unfortunately, I think we get distracted by that short-term opportunity at the expense of long-term viability or sustainability, or more importantly, optimization. So the one thing is, make sure your culture, make sure your purpose, your mission is driven down through the organization so that everybody knows what you're about. And then invest in helping people bridge the gaps between where they're at and where you need them to be. You're in this marketplace, free agents are hard to come by. The people that can grow their own are always going to be in better shape than those that can't. And so invest in your people, but invest in your people with intentionality, not all over the board, but be very focused on what you're trying to accomplish with them. Make sure they understand the problem or problems that you solve in the marketplace. Make sure they're always focused on people first, whether those be clients or whether they be investors or whether they be others in the organization or whether they be in the marketplace. You want to always be able to give a defense for who you are and what you're about as a company so that others might be attracted to it. I don't know that I have anything other than that. It literally is about knowing what it is, driving it down through the organization, having systems that reward and encourage the continuity of that and the alignment of that, and then trying to attract others based upon that, interviewing for that, and then rooting out, getting people that don't belong in that, don't want to be part of that, get them to some place where they can have that elsewhere, and then invest rigorously so your people know that you're willing to help them get there if that's where they want to go.
And that's really, really good. And of course, it reminds me, I have to ask you one more question. Because, both of us started with accounting. And as I listened to you, what I heard and what I firmly believe is we need a new way to think about our numbers. You talked about time frame and, extending things out. And I don't know that there's a model, an ideal model in the market. But what I do believe is we have to think about both our strategic numbers and our KPIs or whatever our other short-term numbers are in a different way than we did in 2017. And do you see the same thing? And do you have any tools or ideas or examples people should pay attention to? Because I know that's frustrating for people. They don't know what benchmarks to have or what to follow.
Again, just a couple things off the top of my head. The first one is, I think KPIs are overused and yet undervalued. And I'm not saying they don't have a place, but so many KPIs are rear view mirror oriented. Revenue, net income, inventory turns. So at the very least, if you're going to use those, make them trending, not not rear view mirror. Even that, though, I'm not sure. I always am a fan of forward-looking key indicators. And if I understand what leads to what and the outcome I want, I start with the outcome I want and I reverse engineer it to the earliest point where I understand the relationship between that activity and the outcome I want. And then I measure that so that I know if I do that, the rest of it just happens. And so that's one thing. The second thing is, and this is a little mathematical and probably technical. The fact is, in this low interest rate environment, you get a higher ROI on long-term investments because it's all about discounted future cash flows. The reason people pay 12 multiples and, on EBITDA, or 15 multiples on this, or, well, it's based on their anticipation of their future discounted cash flows on their watch. And they're using what you've done to date as that. Well, when those interest rates are low, you get that return over a longer period of time, because the value of those future earnings is worth more as you discount it back to today and try to create a value out of it. So there's no better time to make those investments than today. And while you do it to maximize your value, you also do it in case you still have it. So anyway, that's at least what I would give you off the top of my head on that.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad I didn't let that one go. And the one piece I would add is, too often metrics today, KPIs are just an example, are siloed. And you can meet all your metrics in your budget, in your silo, and the company can be going to hell in a handbasket, because you're not looking across the organization. And so, that's my one addition to that.
Yeah, absolutely, where they become very integrated, and they should all cascade down from the overall objectives of the company.
Yes. Well, Troy, this has been great. And, we're working to keep it within the time frame, because we could go for hours. But I want to thank you very much. And, maybe we'll get you back again someday.
Rick, as always, it's my pleasure to get to spend some time with you. And you've been a great source of wisdom and value and learning for me over the years. And I know you'll continue to do that with your audience.